You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
Welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is November 2nd, 2023 at 7:38 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I've been trying to formulate for the last couple of hours what it is that I wanted to talk about. And it hasn't filtered its way out of my mind in a clear, pithy sort of statement that I can riff on very well. So we'll see how that it unfolds in terms of whether it makes a lot of sense or not. I have been talking about the aspect of cultural conditioning that's so pervasive, and the state that the world is in at the moment. It's particularly with the war in the Middle East and the potential of the expansion of that, and climate change coming in, and it just seems like a very interesting time, as the Chinese would say. And how does one come into balance with that? The polarization of the body politic, as we used to call it, the rise of fascism. And if you look at these cycles of history, it's unremarkable to note that the arising of fascism and the arising of inequality are essentially the same thing. That this ever increasing inequality that comes. And then these remarkable fantasies of technology rescuing us in this iteration of that. We're going to invent some crazy technology, and that's going to be the thing that rescues us from all of this. So that really sets me into this place of hopelessness. And I was reading something this week, and there was a quote by Mike Davies. Mike Davies wrote City of Quartz, which was a wonderful description of the development of the city of Los Angeles. There's another book, if you want to understand this place where I live, is the four ecologies of Los Angeles. We have this unusual experience of an environment that's alpine. We have high desert, we have low desert, and we have coastal, all within an easy driving range. He said, fight with hope, or fight without hope, but just fight. And so we have this perception. I think I was talking to a friend of mine about this shift from hopeful to hopeless in the crossing of the 1 degree of heating happening, and thinking that that means that we're just going to have climate change. There's nothing to do about that now. And so really where we should be is in understanding that that's going to happen, and that the different effects that are going to happen as a result of that aren't going to be solved by some new technology that comes along. When you look at that arc of heating, it hasn't even we haven't even slowed down the admissions that will cause this from happening. And I keep hearing in the news these ideas of different technologies that are going to come along and rescue us from this. You can hear in the way that I'm describing it, it's a rather hopeless point of view. The way that the habit I have of creating reality. And so what that means, of course, is that the hot part of the planet, the equator area, the tropics, are going to be an uninhabitable part of the year, and it's going to change the agriculture, which is going to affect the food supply. I know I've said this here before. In North and South America, in this stretch, we actually we're going to do pretty well with the adjustment in food because we're meat centric in our diet. 70 portions of grains equals 1 portion of meat. If we stop eating meat, the 70 portions of grains can then go to feed us. And so as we begin to eliminate meat from the diet, even if the capacity to grow food falls by half, there's still going to be food. But this isn't true in India and China, where they're already vegetarian, a vegetarian-centric diet. They don't have that, which means there's going to be this flow of people. And it's not going to be the trickle that we have now. It's going to be hundreds of millions. So this is kind of when I think of climate change, what I'm seeing is hundreds of millions of people being dislocated by the change in the environment. And then what I see here is we tried building a wall between Texas and Mexico, and that didn't work. So now we're building it between Mexico and Guatemala because it's a shorter distance, and the harshness of the response to people trying to cross it can be greater than here, or it appears that way to me. Instead, shouldn't we be recognizing that we're going to have to integrate into our society all of these people that are being displaced by the actions of our society in releasing the emissions in the first place? The other thing about being in North and South America that makes us advantaged in this is that we're surrounded by water. They can't walk here. We can build a wall between Mexico and Guatemala, and the tropical space between, then we'll have to go south into South America. But in Europe and Asia, they're connected. It's one landmass. They can just walk over, which you see happening. So I guess the question is then, how do we attend to these kinds of existential fearfulnesses that come up around this idea? We get very bogged down, I think, in the day-to-day, and it's harder to imagine a bigger picture. And in the extremes of inequality that we allow, mainly through the way that the taxation of corporations and the banking system and the wealthy has been allowed to happen. And then I am aware that this is I love you, keep going, and we're talking about meditation. But I am also describing the current environment that we're in and how these extremes of inequality are exploding, and how one response is really this neo-fascism, and the other response then would be this compassion for the difficulty that's arising and responding in a way that is actually helpful to people. How do you do that in these extremes that are arising? I was reading in the paper today about the zombie forests in the Sierra, that the climate change shift in the alpine spaces is essentially wiped out the forest, and what's standing are the trees that are no longer alive, which they'll do for years till they decay enough to fall over. We used to go up to Zaka Lake to retreat when that was still viable, and you could begin to see that happening in the pine forests. They would turn a kind of rust colored rather than that pine green, and you would begin to see over the years that we went this increasing number of the rust colored trees. So part of this, of course, is not to turn away from what is unpleasant, but to stand in equanimity and allow this information to come in, and then that in seeing clearly to inform our response to it, so that we have some engagement in what's actually happening. It is certainly easy to disappear into some forms of unconsciousness around this and not address it particularly. I find in the reading that I do that there's really good solutions to almost all of these difficulties that we face. What seems to be absent is a will to engage in them. We get very caught up in the sense of ourselves, very caught up in the identity of ourselves. And we're programmed, particularly in the West, to think of it as a zero-sum game, or there's one pie, and if we cut it up, and there isn't enough to go around, we really need to grab our piece. And my understanding, and this is really influenced by the ideas of attachment, is the search for the meaningfulness of this human life. What are we in this for? And how do we know what we're in for? What are we in it for? What is it that is the thing that ignites a sense of meaning, a sense of fulfillment? I remember hearing in the media world that we're in now that the purpose of life, according to the Dalai Lama, was happiness. But I wonder if he's said that, or if that's what he meant in the translation of happiness, because there is a superficial quality to that doesn't actually provide much in the way of meaning. Even at the level of privilege that I have, which is extraordinary in the whole picture, but in our society, not much, just a contradiction. I think the main value that I got out of my childhood was not material particularly, but it was being around educated parents who could think critically. And so I learned all of those skills, which are invaluable to me in terms of my particular search for meaning. How do you organize your life in such a way that you can spend time each day in the pursuit of things that you find meaningful in the doing of them, and not in exclusively the pursuit of time, energy, and resources to survive in the world? Many people are at a level where that is really all of the energy that there is available, that pursuit. But in privileged communities, and I think that the meditation community tends to be on the privileged side of things, there is the additional space where primary exploration for meaning could happen, and the resistances to doing it. And keeping your balance. In the end, it really is that piece, the balance piece. Can you allow yourself to experience not only your individual world or the small world of your immediate social network, but can you also be open to your position and role in our community and step up for that responsibility? And at the same time, find the meaningfulness of each of your days. As we grow older, the ease of slipping into despair seems to intensify, in the sense that the ordinariness of things is harder to do, and the energy restrictions are much greater. And letting go of that primary exploration, because it's effortful, leads to a despair. Back to hopelessness as a topic. How do you have equanimity with that? Maybe that's a good title for this. How to be equanimous with hopelessness at the state of the world in this current moment. What I find makes that possible is the turning toward the sacredness, the experience of sacredness, of being alive. One of the reasons I was talking about the anxiety around death and how the major religions that we have active in the world really solve this problem of that existential terror by offering solutions that are the next life. And from the Western psychology point of view, even if those aren't true, and that they're relieving of that anxiety, is that useful. A friend of mine, as she died, her last words were, "I'm excited for what's next," which I thought was a remarkable mind space to be in that point of transition. I'm 70, and as it turns out, when you look at the statistics of life expectancy, most people, 80% of people, live into their 70s, but not beyond. And so when you age to this point, there is that experience of the people that you've known over the course of your lifetime, many of them not making it past there. What does this mean, this human life? What does it mean to be alive? What is it that you're doing with this one precious life? And how has the conditioning, particularly that early childhood conditioning that informs so much, affected your capacity to find that thing that this life is. And if it was a difficult childhood and it imposed a lot of limitations, how do you come into peace with that limitation over and over again appearing in your life, so that you can settle into where you are right now and be at peace, and at the same time capable of acting in a way that you find meaningful. So that's my current thinking process, and I will let you know where I arrive in this. And the cognitive aspect of understanding why this all makes sense is not that clear to me, but I do know, in sitting in some of the practices that I do, particularly the bypassing visions practice from the Bon tradition, and coming into the experience of the sacredness of everything, is completely relieving of the distress of considering all of this. Christian?
George, I wonder, you probably have quite a bit of perspective on this, being a meditation teacher. I wonder about like the ebbs and flows of practice, and I guess specifically like meta practice, where it seems like I've had stronger meta practice before, and then sometimes lately it's like it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough generating meta, and so maybe there's, you know, internal factors, maybe there's outside factors. That's a kind of a big question, but I'm curious about your thoughts on sort of the ebbs and flows and dealing with that and planning for it and reacting.
The way that lands to me is the movement between the identification with the self-experience and the moving out of the identification of the self-experience, and noticing the self-reaction when you do the practice. So it isn't really the quality of the sitting experience as the self-experience that matters. The self-experience could be totally bummed out by the practice and bored and wanting to be entertained. And if you still engage in the practice, what you'll notice is that the fruits of the practice arise as the identification with that constricted self-experience relaxes. So you do the metta practice, you establish the view and maintain the view, even with the tantruming self-experience as part of the view, because the self-experience is not actually what's happening. The self-experience is the record of what's happening in a sense. Using the printer metaphor, the CPU and the programming, the conditioning all work it out, and then they send a copy to the printer. And then the self picks it up in the printer and looks at it, and that's what's happening. But the process of getting that to the printer was unconscious and automatic and based on the conditioning. And so in evaluating what that outcome is, we can mentalize the process and the meanings that we use to get there. And in that back and forth between this is what I've made, this is the data, this is what I've made, this is the data, if we need to correct it. And we can, in an expansive awareness, allow that self-experience to come and go, even when it's disgruntled, and not affect the view that much. I don't know how long ago this was, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I would go to Shinzen's year-end retreat, maybe longer. And I would sit for 4 hours in the morning, and then I would sit for 4 hours in the afternoon, depending on what the Dharma, his class. He usually has a class in the morning, or did on his retreats. And if I was comfortable with the topic and already had a sense of that I understood it well enough, I would sit for 4 hours. And if you did a 2-week or a 15-day retreat, something like that, usually for the first couple of days, I would just do breath counting. So I was really concentrated. And what that meant to me was that I could hold attention on the breath for about an hour without getting caught up in thinking too much. Not enough to lose the count. So using breath counting as and then shifting into the insight practice. And I typically would go to retreat with an idea of what I was going to practice if it were available to practice. And I went on this one particular retreat, and I couldn't get to 3 or 4 in the breath counting even one time without getting distracted. And I did that for 15 days, 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening, not making any progress at all. And the self experience just became completely distraught because there was some ego involvement about what a great meditator I am. And then about 6 weeks after the retreat, one of the most significant breakthroughs in my practice happened. So it was quite clear that the attention and the pressure on pushing through that, the unwillingness of the body mind to attend to what was happening required that. But had you asked the self, they would say it was completely unproductive and awful experience that should never be repeated. And yet the unconscious automatic responses shifted significantly. So when you look at the ebbs and flows of practice, it isn't really the pleasantness or unpleasantness that the self experience is having. It is, in the long view, are things changing? Are they shifting? And that's really where you pay attention. Particularly with metta practice, I notice if I'm doing the metta and the self is suffering in doing it, as soon as the suffering self-experience goes away, if I'm able to hold the view, I notice that the view is quite different than an ordinary view. That makes sense. The thing that I find so enjoyable about the metta mind is that everybody looks so beautiful to me when I'm in metta mind. And that's usually the first place I go. Do people look unusually beautiful? And then that's one way of understanding that's the view that I'm in. Did I answer your question well enough?
I think so. I guess I heard you to say keep practicing, essentially.
And
there's sorry, go ahead.
And have insight into the nature that the self-experience, whether they enjoy the practice, whether they enjoy the practice or they don't, since each one that arises is different. That actually isn't how you evaluate whether the practice is productive.
Right. Yeah, I guess sort of aside from that aspect, there's there seems to be like a sort of beginner's fervor to practice.
Right.
So dealing with getting out of that phase, or I've never been a better meditator than when I had no idea what I was doing.
It seemed to the self.
It seemed to the self. Where I recognize I have a more nuanced practice, but there is kind of a beginner's fervor that takes you over some initial humps.
If there's a sophomore slump, what is the junior period?
I think that's when you get your car.
So the junior period is where you're a pretty good meditator and you meditate, and the big shifts haven't happened, and you're taking it on faith in the way that we mean it in Buddhist understanding. You take it on faith that the teacher is telling you what's true and is intending to be helpful to you, and then you have to practice and get it through direct experience. To be skillful is to understand that the self-experience, whether it's suffering or it's enjoying, whether it's hopeless or hopeful, is not the whole thing, not even the bigger part of it, and that the ability to respond to the conditions of the present moment in a skillful way, regardless of that experience, is what's necessary, but also a desirable goal of practice. So why don't we do some practice? All right, let go of the meditation. So any comments or questions about that? So we have a new thing that I've not done before on November 17th. I think that's a Friday. Let me look and make sure. It's an hour and 15-minute long class called How to Date Like a Secure Person, Even If You're Not Yet Secure, which is talking about how attachment patterns form relational patterns and how to manage that so that even if you don't do the deep work of uprooting your native attachment strategy, you can begin to form secure functioning relationships. And then if you can put those in place, maybe use those as a platform to explore the deeper attachment conditioning you faced. Anyway, we've not done it before. The first one is going to be on the 17th of November. In December, the 4 Saturdays of December, we're going to do a level 1 in the morning. And then in January, we're going to start a new level 2 on Friday mornings, which is good for also the Central European time. So take a look at that. That's what's coming up. I will be traveling next week, so there'll be no I Love You, Keep Going next week, but it will return the week after that. I offer the teaching freely, but if you're resourced and are able to, I do appreciate making a donation. There's a link on the website to do it. Any amount is fine. It really helps support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. Really appreciate your practice. Thank you for practicing tonight, and we'll see you soon. Bye.